Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to the Caderna podcast. I'm Brian Caderna. In today's episode, we'll be discussing one of my favorite topics. No, it's not personal finance. We're going to be talking sports. I'll be sitting down with author David Sweet as we dive into some of sports' biggest controversies, all in under an hour. So if you're not familiar with who David is, let me give you a quick background. He has launched columns for the Wall Street Journal, for NBCSports.com, and has been a writer for the LA Times, for the Classic Chicago magazine, and many other prominent publications. He has a master's in print journalism from the University of Southern California. Perhaps what David's best known for are his books. We're going to start with his book, 3 Seconds in Munich, the controversial 1972 Olympic basketball final. That came out in 2019. And then David's first book, Lamar Hunt, the gentle giant who revolutionized professional sports, which came out in 2010. I'll include links to both of those books in the show notes. So we'll start our conversation with that dominant U.S. basketball team that was robbed of gold in the 72 games. That was largely overshadowed by the terrorist attacks on the Israeli team. And it was also the only Olympics in which the legendary runner Steve Prefontaine was able to compete. Then we'll get into that first book I mentioned on Lamar Hunt. And we'll talk about and learn about how he revolutionized football, soccer, tennis, and more with oil money. So listen into this wide-ranging conversation as we cover these huge controversies in sports, and we'll lead into a teaser on David's next potential project, which is gambling in sports. So wherever you're tuning in, please leave us a review, spread the good word, tell a friend so we can keep growing this podcast as we pursue wealth in its original meaning, a state of well-being. You know, money may be one spoke of that wheel, but athletics and sports is certainly another spoke. So enjoy our conversation. Without further ado, here's David Sweet.
Is going to require work and time and sweat and toil.
If money wasn't an issue, what would I be doing?
Don't worry about it. You'll figure it out.
Change is the only constant.
The Caderna Podcast.
David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So I take it you've always had quite an interest in sports, you know, just going by the books that you've written.
You're exactly right. I loved sports growing up, played a lot of baseball and golf and tennis. And I still play a number of sports, including golf and squash and bike and do other things. But yeah,
it's awesome.
Sports to me is just so much fun. I love the competition. I love playing with my children in terms of, you know, just throwing the football around the yard. And so, yeah, it's been a lifelong passion of mine.
That's great. And when did it kind of morph from just being an athlete, a fan of sports, to actually being a writer and a documenter of sports?
I guess it really happened after college. I would cover high school basketball games for the local newspaper. And then after I went to USC and got my master's degree, I became a sports editor in Los Angeles for a daily paper. And what a great town to be a sports editor in. You know, they pretty much had 2 teams for everything, 2 baseball, hockey teams, 2 basketball, 2 NFL teams at that point. And now they have 2 again after a long drought, along with USC and UCLA. So there was just so much to cover out there and so many great stories. And then I, you know, continued my career with the Wall Street Journal and NBCSports.com, and then wrote a couple of books that you mentioned.
That's awesome. And I mean, how do you think sports is transitioning in today's day and age? Because I feel like we're at an impasse where forever it was, you know, the athletes go play. You know, we maybe don't know so much about them other than they're a phenomenal athlete, football player, basketball player, what have you. To now, it seems that athletes are athletes, but then they also have their own platform and they're trying to have a message. And you're seeing some fans that love that. They love following their favorite athlete on Twitter, or then you have some other folks that say, hey, you're here to dribble a basketball, as was said about LeBron, and go do so. You know, we don't want to know about your politics or 1,000 other endeavors. How do you feel like kind of communicating the story? Has that changed over the years?
Yeah, it's changed quite a bit. The players realize they don't need the media as much. They can go directly to the fan via social media. They can obviously have their own Twitter accounts, their own Instagram accounts, and they don't need the middleman of people asking them tough questions. So I think, yeah, because they are on their own more, they're able to talk about their politics more, and obviously some fans don't like that. And they just want the athletes to talk about athletics, just like they want movie stars to talk more about movies and not give their opinion on every political topic that is hot at the moment.
And has that changed like your job at all? Have you felt like sometimes you stray away at all from the sport, or are you more trying to always kind of reel them in and take the story just back to the game?
It doesn't affect me that much because I write a column, which is more of a feature column for Classic Chicago magazine, along with Chicago District Golfer in the area. And my stories are more feature oriented, profile oriented. So I'm not out there day to day covering the athletes like a beat reporter would for a team.
Mhm.
So in terms of what you're referring to, it hasn't impacted me like it would a main sports reporter for a daily newspaper.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And do you prefer to kind of do more of those profiles? And then I want to get into your books as well. I know that
Sure.
these are more historical events, historical teams or personas that at least you've put in the book format. Is that what you like to kind of go back in time and expose people? I'm sure there's a lot of people as we talk today about the 1972 Olympics or about Lamar Hunt. There's many millennials out there that say, well, what happened? What is
Right.
that?
Right. Well, yeah, to your point, I mean, yeah, profiles, features, I love writing those. I love conducting research and interviewing people and then putting it all together. So that's more my genre, which also works well for books, obviously, as opposed to being a guy who breaks news about an NFL trade or that sort of thing. I love sort of the more in depth, long form storytelling.
Okay. And so I want to get into the latest book that you have. Again, that's called 3 Seconds in Munich. When everybody hears the 1972 Olympics, they just think of the terrorist attack. That,
Hmm.
wasn't that the crazy Olympics, unfortunately with the Israeli players or athletes that got killed. But something else happened, as we're going to talk about, with the U.S. basketball team. First off, what was the inspiration behind that? Why did you decide to kind of dive headfirst into that particular story?
So
Yeah.
I had a New York. I was trying to get a New York agent to sell my book to a publishing house, and I had a couple of ideas for him, and he wasn't that impressed, and said, I need something more dramatic. And as I uncovered more on the '72 Olympics and the controversial gold medal basketball game, I thought, boy, this is a fascinating story on different levels. And he still didn't bite, but uh, I was able to contact the University of Nebraska Press. They publish many sports books and pitch it myself to them, and they were excited about it. They were happy to publish it. And again, the story in my mind, you mentioned terrorism. You have the evil of terrorism, the corruption that happened at the end of this gold medal basketball game, the heartbreak the U.S. players felt. So there's so much to it. I thought it's an amazing story, and I still think it is today.
Yeah, I think it is. And can you tell us, because I'm sure there's a lot of people right now that are listening or watching this that are saying to themselves, what happened to Team USA? And so we know that they were cheated. Can you just kind of clarify, get some context to what actually occurred there?
Yeah. So to give you some background, the basketball started in the Olympics in 1936 in Berlin, and the U.S. had won every gold medal since. And so in the '72 game, they're playing the Soviet Union, who they had played against before in gold medal games and beaten. And the U.S. was down the whole game. And in the last few seconds, Doug Collins, famous NBA name, stole a pass and was fouled with 3 seconds to go. Down by a point at that time, the U.S. Collins, made the two free throws, and the U.S. took the lead 50-49 with 3 seconds left. and the Soviets inbounded the ball, and all of a sudden there was a commotion at the scorers table, and time was called by the referee with 1 second left, so 2 seconds had been played. A Soviet assistant coach had been trying to call timeout, but he wasn't given a timeout. So 1 second, again, should have remained. R. William Jones, the head of international basketball, came down from the stands and said, no, 3 seconds remain. So he overruled the referees on the court, which is against the rules. The referees control the game. It's like if you think of Adam Silver coming down during an NBA game and saying,
Yeah.
put more time on the clock. I mean, I assume he'd be fired, or the fans would boo him out of the stadium. So Jones did that, and the Soviets inbounded the ball again with 3 seconds left. They took a long shot that missed. 3 seconds had elapsed. The U.S. won the gold medal again, basically. And R. Williams Jones came down from the stands again and said, no, 3 seconds remain. The clock hadn't been set properly, so that play didn't count. And amid all this, the Soviets had brought in, it was very chaotic at this point. So illegally, they brought in a substitute, Ivan Nadeshko, who didn't check in at the scorers table. And so on the last play of the game, Tom McMillan was trying to guard him. A referee told McMillan to move away, and Nadeshko had a clear look down the court. So he shot putted the ball, 80 feet or so down the court. Alexander Beloff was at the other end. He grabbed the ball. Two U.S. defenders fell to the side. Beloff had the easiest shot of the Olympics. No one was guarding him, and he banked it in, and 3 seconds had elapsed again. This time, no more time was put on the clock, and the Soviets won 51-50 for their first gold medal in Olympic basketball.
Wow. That's incredible. Is this something, do you know, is there footage of this out there that
there is? Yeah,
watch?
if you check on YouTube, I looked for footage of the complete game. I couldn't find the complete game, but I did find, a lot of different parts of the game out there. And definitely these, that last shot is on there on YouTube, along with the American celebration that had happened before this shot, and a lengthy look at how bad the U.S. had played for most of the game until the final few minutes when they had a massive comeback.
Wow, that's crazy. And what was the gentleman's name? I guess you said he was the head of international basketball at the time?
Yes, R. William Jones, pretty much, he was the head of international basketball since 1932, so 40 years at this point. And he had been involved in every Olympic tournament. And even back in the 50s, Fogg Allen, a famous Kansas coach, had complained. He thought that R. William Jones, he, like during the gold medal basketball game in 52, R. William Jones had hung out with the Soviets during the game when he should have been a neutral observer. So there had been accusations that Jones favored the Soviets, and he wasn't a Russian citizen or anything, but he just seemed, at the end of this game, when the U.S. lost, he was quoted as saying, they have to learn how to lose once. At this point, they had won every Olympic game they had ever played, 63 until that game.
Well, and where was R. William Jones from originally?
That's a great question. He basically grew up in Italy, and he went to college in the U.S., and to Springfield, I believe, where basketball was created. And he was an English citizen, so it was sort of an odd combination. But yeah, he, ran international basketball with an iron fist. And you look back at this game, and why didn't the referees or the score table or anyone stand up to him? Well, they owed his job to him. And they were just like, okay, well, if he says there are 3 seconds left, there are 3 seconds left.
It's such a crazy, crazy story.
Right.
And so, did anything ever come out that he was somehow kind of sympathizing with the Soviet Union or was against the U.S.? I'm sure that would be the obvious assumption, but did anything come to light from that?
Well, let me put it this way. In terms of the Soviets winning, that could only help increase the popularity of international basketball. And the head of international basketball was Jones. And why would it increase popularity? Because more than one team could win at the Olympics. And so did I find information that Jones favored the Soviets? There wasn't a smoking gun per se. I mean, the Russians would give him a lot of gifts during the Olympics, but that's not to say the U.S. or others didn't give him gifts. But I will say the U.S. protested the game. And so the next morning, a committee was created. And Jones again flouted the rules because the people who were supposed to be part of this protest committee were people who were part of the Olympics in basketball. And the head of the committee was a guy from Yugoslavia whose last name was Hep. And not only did Yugoslavia not play basketball in those Olympics, he was one of Jones' biggest drinking buddies. And that's confirmed in a biography that was written of Jones. So he put his great friend on top of this 5-man committee. 3 of the committee members were communist countries. 2 were more favored to the U.S., Puerto Rico and Italy, I believe. And the U.S. lost the protest 3-2. And Jones also, he acted after the game. He's like, no, I didn't ask to put time back on the clock. And then once the footage showed that he had, they show him up there at the scorer's table with 3 fingers up. He finally relented. But in my mind, it's the most controversial finish in sports history. You've never seen time put on the clock, twice, 3 times. Just that, for just sort of bizarre reasons that really aren't justified.
Yeah. And then as an outcome, correct me if I'm wrong, this was the only Olympics where then the athletes, the American basketball team in this instance, actually refused their medals, correct?
You're exactly right. They're the only Olympic athletes in history, and to this day are still the only ones to refuse their medals, which were silver medals. And they had been asked over the years by the U.S. Olympic Committee and others to accept the medals. They have not. And 2 of them, in fact, have in their wills that their descendants cannot accept the medals either.
Wow.
And an interesting sidelight to that is when people think about the silver medals, well, where are they? There are only 7 that remain, and they're in Switzerland. No one knows what happened to the other 5. So even if the U.S. players accepted the medals at this point, there are only 7 to hand out.
That's just nuts. And when did I feel like as a fan of sports, I ought to know this, but when was the Miracle on Ice? What year did that occur?
So that was 8 years later in 1980.
Okay.
And I was at that game.
Were you really? Wow.
Yeah. I was only 17. And I was with my dad, and obviously an incredible game, a total upset with the U.S. winning. What some people forget, though, is that was not the gold medal game. That was a semifinal game, and the U.S. still had to beat Finland to win the gold medal.
Yeah. It just seems like you always, even to this day, there is, maybe now we have certainly China in the mix, but it was always these 2 superpowers. And that's where I feel like sports is a microcosm of life, where for the longest time, it was, the U.S., and we kind of portray them as all that's good and all that's righteous. And then the Soviets are now the Russian, where it was, those are the guys that are maybe cheating, kind of like the Rocky narrative of you got Rocky versus Ivan Drago. And
Right.
It's like that storyline is apparent in so many different places. And it was like it seems like we put it to bed with the Miracle on Ice when we upset the Giant.
Right.
But it only adds more to that when you learn about the story in 72. And so did it just kind of go away? Like, was there any follow-up to that of who's right, who's wrong, do an investigation, or was it just like, okay, we'll move on because, oh, by the way, there was this terrible terrorist activity that occurred, and sweep the rest under the carpet?
Yeah, that's a good question. Basically, the media was very different then, as I alluded to, in terms of there was no ESPN, no Twitter. So there wasn't a heck of a lot of follow up to the controversial gold medal game. The U.S. players were told that they should not reject their silver medals by Olympic Committee people and others, but they stood by their principles. The following year, the U.S. brought a protest to the International Olympic Committee saying that the game was not fair. They even had one of the referees attest that time should not have been put back on the clock the way it was. They had others at the score table agree with that statement. But when the USOC representative went in, the IOC, they were just very dismissive, and they said, "What?" And they basically said, "We can't believe your players didn't accept the medals. We are not going to overturn the result." And so to this day, it hasn't been overturned. I doubt it ever will be. It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
But I will add, too, there was another factor against the U.S. in that game. There was a Bulgarian referee, Artanik Arabajian, and his motives were suspect, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But his calls were really bad, and I was able to sort of watch a number of them on video and sort of rewind them. So in the last 3 minutes of international basketball, at that point, any foul, the player went to the line. And at the end of the game, he called a number of fouls against the U.S. that were highly questionable. And in fact, one foul, the Soviet player who was fouled was sort of a minor player, but the player who went to shoot the free throws was their best player, Sergei Belov, who ended up with 20 of the 51 points in the game. So he was, by far the best player. And the Americans were pointing, saying, "No, this isn't the guy that was fouled." Yet he was allowed to take the free throws. And Arabajian is the guy who he told Tom McMillan to move away from the baseline, even though Tom McMillan had every right to guard the final play at the baseline. He had done it the previous play, but Arabajian moved him away. Arabajian had allowed the illegal substitute into the game. And anyway, to my point of motive, after the game, he had roomed with a referee from the U.S. named Jim Bain. And Bain was saying, that game was crazy. What was going on? And Arabajian told Bain that he had feared for the life of his family if the Soviets had not won the game. So, I think he the Soviets led by quite a bit for most of the game. So he didn't really need to do much to affect the outcome. But by the end, he did. And he made some pretty obvious bad calls and some bad oversights as a ref.
Jeez, it's wild. And I mean, up to that point, obviously, U.S. basketball was it. They dominated. Like you said, they won every single gold up until then. Did anything change? Because, I think this gives us a lot of context to today, where I'm sure a lot of people, myself included, it's like the introduction to Olympic basketball was the Dream Team.
Mm-hmm,
and it was like, wow, this is a collection of like the greatest players ever that just went out and just destroyed everybody. And then it was kind of like, all right, this is, I guess, the way it is. America just dominates basketball. And then I can't remember when it was, there was like that sudden decline where I think we lost to Puerto Rico or something like in like 05, 06, maybe around that time frame. And it just seems like it's never really been the same.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, the U.S., 63 in a row till 72. And then they won in 76. They won the gold again. 80 Olympics boycott. They didn't go to Moscow. And then they won the 84 Olympics with Michael Jordan and Patrick Ewing and some amazing players. But in 88, I think they won the bronze medal. And that got people thinking, shouldn't we send our best players to the Olympics, the pros? And then the rules changed. And to be honest, I mean, that's what the Soviets had been doing forever. Even in the 70s.
They were playing pros.
they were playing their pros. I mean, these guys played, hundreds of games a year together. When the U.S. would have college players, like in the 70s, they'd get together, say in June, and then, have a training camp, and they, barely played together by the time they got to the Olympics. In that 72 match, the Soviets had I think it was a 31-year-old player. So, and they had guys who had been in the 64 and 68 Olympics. So they just didn't even bother to abide by the rules. The U.S. did. They sent the college players. And one of the sadder parts for the 72 team is this was their only chance at an Olympic medal, because once they turned pro the following year, they couldn't compete for an Olympic medal anymore. It was against the rules. So, they had this one chance, and they were really, it's just unfortunate how
they got robbed. Yeah,
they got robbed. Exactly.
And so did the rules change? Like when the Dream Team came about, did the Olympic Committee say, okay, we can have pros across the board, but just for this one particular sport?
I think it was pros across the board. I don't have all the details, but that sounds right. So yeah, the U.S. was able to have, Michael Jordan in his second Olympics, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, the Dream Team, who, pretty much crushed every team that they competed against. So it was a whole new world. I mean, and now these players can win 3 or 4 gold medals in their career. Back in the day for the U.S., you could win 1 and then you moved on to the pros.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess somehow it all worked out in the wash, because you look at basketball now as such a global game, where even with the pros, that's, I think, was like the biggest embarrassment for us, is when we had the NBA out there playing. And whenever that first Olympics, I'm drawing a blank, that they lost in, it was like, what are you guys doing? Like, how's this even possible? We got all-stars and nobody can even name the other players, and we ended up losing.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. Yeah, they haven't. Yeah, I think it was either 04 or 08 they lost, and people were stunned. But you mentioned sort of the international basketball. It's amazing since 1972 how it's grown, and the NBA now has more than 100 players from outside the U.S. and from they're from China, Africa, Europe, everywhere. So international basketball has exploded in the last 50 years. And that's benefited the NBA. I mean, you look at the guy known as the Greek Freak up in Milwaukee, and how
Giannis.
Yes, exactly. How impressive he has been, along with so many others. It's been a boon to the NBA to have these great players. It's not, back in the 60s, I think might have been all the United States at that point, but now they get the best of the best from around the world.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, it's definitely exciting to see how it's all evolved, and maybe to kind of tie it all together with the kind of the U.S. Soviet Union or U.S. Russia dynamic with the Olympics, where it does seem, and I try to be unbiased, but it does seem like the Russians have on a number of occasions obviously cheated. And most recently, and I don't know if this is your area of expertise, but they've competed not as Russia, right? It's been like the ROC, like the Russian Olympic, competitor or whatever it is. Didn't they circumvent, the rules so that they were allowed to come back in?
And I've heard of that, but you're right. It's not my area of expertise, so I'm not sure how much I can add. But yeah, they've been accused of many things over the years in the Olympics. And it's never been good. I mean, I think they've been, they've definitely been accused of illegal drug use and cheating and other improper behavior. So,
yeah, it's crazy that I guess the Olympics have changed in good ways and bad ways.
Right.
And then, for lack of a better segue, I mean, I know it's just such a crazy topic. Again, 3 seconds in Munich. It's, literally 3 seconds. That was such a huge controversy. So you have that one. And then almost a decade earlier, you wrote this book on football. Was Lamar Hunt, was that something that, were you just a huge fan and you said, I'm just going to take a deep dive into this? Or how did that one kind of bubble to the surface?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had interviewed him twice before he died. He died in 2007.
Mhm.
And I interviewed him. You mentioned football, but some people know him more as the founder of Major League Soccer. And I was with a magazine called Sports Business Journal, and this was Major League Soccer was having some troubled times. They were two teams were being disbanded, basically. Now Major League Soccer is in much better shape. But I interviewed him about that, and then I interviewed him about the 2-point conversion. Not everyone knows that Lamar Hunt fought for that to become a rule in the NFL to allow teams to, not just have to kick an extra point, which he thought was pretty boring. He wanted them to have the opportunity to, try the 2-point conversion. And he finally got it passed in the 1990s. He had fought for it since the 1970s. And he had, why didn't people want it? And it sounded like coaches didn't want to have to make that decision. They felt, they'd be blamed if they made the wrong decision. So
Which they are.
Yeah, exactly. They're more comfortable with just the extra point.
Yeah.
So, so Lamar Hunt fascinated me because he started so many things. He was the founder of the American Football League in when he was 27 years old, basically. You think how young that is.
Wow.
And that is because he tried to get an NFL franchise, but they wouldn't let him in. And so the team he founded in the AFL was the Dallas Texans, who became the Kansas City Chiefs. And then he, again, Major League Soccer, he helped found that, and he helped its predecessor, the North American Soccer League, survive in the 70s. Most people know the NASL because Pele played for it and drew huge crowds as a player for the New York Cosmos. And Lamar Hunt also had a professional tennis tour, and this helped open the tennis tournaments to how we know them today. Wimbledon used to be purely amateur. The U.S. Open was only for amateurs. It wasn't open, to put it another way. So these major tournaments only allowed amateurs in because they were considered sportsmen. The pros were not considered as well. But once Hunt had these, had these players who were pros, and some of them, let's say, had won Wimbledon the year before, and now they had turned pro. Well, Wimbledon couldn't just say no pros. And it's sort of a lost history in this country that the amateurs were considered like the only legitimate players in tennis. So anyway, he did that. He coined the term Super Bowl. And that term was sort of laughed off at first. It just didn't sound, what's the word? It's just not elegant enough. It sounded more goofy than anything for a big, important game. But obviously the name is stuck.
Is it true? If I could jump in on that point,
Sure.
I read an article one time that he couldn't think of a name, and his son was bouncing a super ball, like a super bouncy, like rubber ball.
Right.
And then that's when it just occurred, like Super Bowl.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah. And I can't remember if it was a son or a daughter, but someone was bouncing a ball in the house. Yeah. Super Bowl became the name. Yep. And he mentioned it. And I think Pete Rozelle, the commissioner at the time, sort of scoffed at it. And the first couple of games were called the AFL NFL World Championship game, something along those lines. But then Super Bowl came into being, and they sort of, now they call it Super Bowl I, Super Bowl II, et cetera, from those original games. And he owned a piece of the Chicago Bulls. And he just was this amazing entrepreneur who, just really impacted the sports landscape. He gets a lot of credit for bringing the AFL and NFL together for the big merger in the 60s, because the leagues were battling so much over all the football talent and, salary wars where Joe Namath would get hundreds of thousands of dollars to play for the AFL. And so, that it was crucial to bring the leagues together so there was no more fighting for talent. And, the NFL today, is so far beyond any other sports league in the U.S. in terms of revenue and popularity. Sure. And the Super Bowls now, you look at the top broadcasts of any year or of all time, the Super Bowl every year is the biggest one at over 100 million viewers. Wow. And over, let's say, the top 100 broadcasts in U.S. history, 50 plus or Super Bowls. So,
That's incredible.
yeah.
And a question I have to kind of like hit the rewind
Sure.
button a little bit.
Mhm.
So you said Lamar Hunt started kind of this dive into sports when he was 27 years old.
Right.
I'm sure a lot of people are scratching their heads saying, how's that even possible? What did he
Yeah.
do leading up to that? What was he, some business magnate, or did he get it the old fashioned way and inherit it?
Yeah, well, that's a great point. So his father, H.L. Hunt, was the richest man in America.
Okay.
It was oil money, Texas oil money, and Lamar was one of his 6 children from his first family. He ended up having a couple of families on the side. That's a whole nother story. But Lamar was fascinated by sports his whole life. His nickname was Games as a kid. And he went to SMU and played on the football team there. I think he was not a first stringer, but he played against, some of his teammates were pretty important guys in the NFL, like Forrest Gregg. Raymond Berry was a famous receiver. And he just, he loved football. He loved creating things. And when he went to the NFL, they just sort of laughed at him. George Halas, the founder mainly of the NFL, the main founder, I'd say, he didn't want this upstart kid in the league. But then when Hunt and 7 others created the American Football League, the NFL noticed. And once Hunt put a team in Dallas for the AFL, the NFL put a team in Dallas the same year, the Dallas Cowboys. So instead of giving Hunt his own Dallas team, he created a league, and the NFL went into Dallas anyway. So,
and so that's ultimately what started the AFL. Is he was not allowed to buy a team in the NFL, so he said,
Right.
"All right, I'll just take my toys and go elsewhere."
Yeah. He recruited 7 others. They called themselves the Foolish Club. A couple of the others were Ralph Wilson, who owned the Bills. Bud Adams owned the Houston Oilers that became the Tennessee Titans. Oh boy, I think his name is escaping me. Sonny Werblin, it might have been, who owned the Jets. So all these guys, well off, obviously, all of them started the AFL. And H.L. Hunt, there's a famous story, well, how long can Lamar do this? And, how long can he just lose millions of dollars a year? And it was, H.L. Hunt basically said, it can go on as long as he wants. along those lines, because Lamar Hunt had so much money, it really didn't matter. But one thing that did happen, he realized with the NFL in Dallas that Dallas was his hometown, that he'd probably have to leave Dallas because there's no way an NFL and an AFL team would both survive in that city. So after the Texans won the 62 AFL championship, he moved them to Kansas City, which was very painful for him but he knew it was for the best for the league, for the growth of the league, to have, instead of the Cowboys and the Texans fighting for fans forever in Dallas.
Yeah. Huh. And so, it seems like NFL kind of, I guess, got the bragging rights at the end of the day. It's still called the NFL. Was AFL, were they like a losing enterprise, and hence that's why they don't get the name anymore?
Yeah, well, the NFL had been established since roughly the early 20s. So so they got the name, and the NFL was the stronger league. And, the NFL commissioner stayed the commissioner of the whole enterprise. It just made sense. The AFL was more the upstart league. But that merger has just created a powerhouse in sports that, again, really can't be matched by any other sport in the U.S.
Yeah, it's untouchable, and something unique about football, that I've always thought is it's truly American. There's not really, it's not like basketball, like we spoke about earlier, that's taken off around the globe.
Right.
It seems like an American game. When we say American pastime about baseball, you can't even say that about baseball with just how much international talent there is. But in football, there's nothing else. You got the NFL, and then maybe you have NFL Europe, which is was just a collection of American football players that went to Europe.
Right.
So it's
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The game is not taken off outside of the U.S. and the NFL obviously hosts games in London and Mexico City and elsewhere, and NFL Europe. They tried to make that a big deal. But yeah, it's just, and there's been talk, oh, maybe have a Europe division of the NFL. That's a way to expand. It seems unlikely because it just, the game sort of has to be taught to other countries and other cultures. It's not just like here in America, we play it outside, we grow up with it, we see it on TV all the time. It's ingrained in us, but not in other countries.
Yeah. And I feel right now, I mean, the NFL is just, like we alluded to, so on fire. It's the most watched sport, the richest sport. And I know they always want to get bigger and better, but it's like once you have, like, they may have found the secret sauce, and it's like, I don't know if they should do too much to kind of, play with that.
Right. And it's interesting you mentioned that. Yeah, they found the secret sauce, but now with legal sports gambling, will that impact the secret sauce? Because a number of players have been suspended. I think 10 is the number, minor players mostly, because they've gambled on NFL games and other games. And it's so funny because all the pro sports were so against gambling for decades and decades. And Pete Rozelle, I'm sorry, no, it was Paul Tagliabue who testified in front of Congress and, said this is horrible. Gambling should never be part of the NFL. We're against all kinds of gambling. And then all the leagues did a 180 and now they embrace it and they get sponsorships who are people like DraftKings and FanDuel and all of them. Yeah. You just have to wonder. So yeah, they're getting this gambling revenue in from, DraftKings and all these others. But if people start questioning the integrity of the games because so many players are starting to bet because they can legally, that's going to, the golden goose may be killed, because if the fans think some of these games are rigged by the players who now have access to bet on games so easily, that's going to really, that would be the ruin of any sport, just like it almost ruined baseball with the Black Sox scandal.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, because I think when you mention, that it could ruin sports of players or the coaches actually gambling on their own game,
right?
Of course, that would be a travesty. But I think from the other side, if you just kind of put rose-colored glasses on, it just seems like the revenue you could bring in is endless. Because, how many people Sunday are tuning into a Browns game they care nothing about, but they said, I put $10 on it. Now I'm glued to the TV. So
no, that's an excellent point. That's, that was happening when gambling was illegal, except for Nevada sports gambling. But yeah, now that, I think I read something like 70 million people plan to gamble on the NFL games this year.
Wow.
When get these huge numbers, they're going to watch a game they don't care about. They may have a bet on one of the teams or hoping one of the players has more than 40 yards receiving, so they win that bet.
Or what the coin toss is, all this crazy stuff. Yep.
And you can bet live action. There are a million bets during games you can bet on. It's not just the one bet before a game. So it's a whole new world. Yeah.
And I wonder, I don't know if you know anything about this, but like, one, how did the guys now in the modern day and age, the 10 that you mentioned that got caught in the NFL, how do they even get caught?
That's a great question. I think, the leagues have obviously upgraded their, observation of what's going on, their security of gambling. And I think, as far as I've read, they can figure out, even if a player is telling a mother or something, hey, mom, bet on a game. And somehow, and I don't know the details, but they can figure it out. And obviously, if a player is using his own phone to bet, that's, they can figure that out. So it's, and it's traceable, I guess. is one way to put it, as opposed to someone giving cash to an illegal bookie. And if there's not a photograph or anything, that's harder to prove. But, if there's a text from a player to his mother saying, hey, put $10, or it'd be more than that, put $1,000 on the game for me. I don't know. I can't say that the NFL, can spy on phones or anything, but they have some way where they're able to figure out that, hey, something's off here.
I imagine that's got to be tough, because I feel like you're talking, to do it right, just an incredible amount of surveillance and invasion of privacy. Yeah,
that's the word I was looking for. Yeah,
it's Big Brother. Yeah,
right. And again, they wouldn't be allowed to spy on their phones or anything, but I don't know if they do it more from, like, they have a partnership with DraftKings where the bets go in. Maybe maybe. Because I made these points, I should know more to sort of justify them.
Yeah, I feel like the only way to make it legitimate would almost be something so severe, like a lifetime ban or something. Because if the player doesn't have that level of fear, and they know, like, they could just tell their next door neighbor, like, oh, hey, I heard this team, the quarterback's not suiting up Sunday or whatever. Yeah. It's like, how, unless you have someone, like, if you're bugging their house, like, how can you find everything?
No, it's a great point. And, think of the trainers, think how much they know. Travis Kelce, the trainer, the Chiefs might have known before anyone else, they wasn't going to play, even though others in the public kept thinking maybe he would play for a couple of days. That trainer, or any trainer on any team, could put a bet down with knowledge that no one else has. And again, how easy it is these days, just on a phone. It takes, 10 seconds versus trying to call up an illegal bookie or however it would have been done in the past. So.
Do you know if any of the major commissioners right now, like Roger Goodell or Silverman in the NBA, like, have any of them made a comment or an opinion one way or the other on the legalization of gambling?
Well, it's funny. Adam Silver in 2014 had a New York Times op-ed piece embracing legal gambling. And as far as I know, he was the first commissioner to do so, because before that, they were all as against it as could be, claiming rightly, I think, that the integrity of the game would have been compromised if, legal gambling existed all over the country. But now, Roger Goodell and all of them embrace it. They support it. And of course, they do say, we have parameters in place to make sure it doesn't affect the integrity of the game. And again, they love it for the new revenue stream they have for advertisements and for sponsorships. And, the NFL is known for always looking for new streams of revenue, whether it be internationally or a new business in the United States, and every league is like that. So they're very happy with it, despite being against it, vociferously in the past.
Yeah, I guess there's only so much that you can do,
right?
But this has been great, David. It's fun, and we're kind of going through like a history of sports, I feel like, right now. And so with that said, we've kind of done the past, the present, and what's the future hold? Like, what are you looking to do next? Are you working on any cool projects? What are you writing on? Like, what do you have up your sleeve?
Next is a little bit what I was just talking about. I put together a lot of information on legal sports gambling. I believe, more than 30 states now are allowing it. Again, it used just to be one. Nevada, Washington, D.C. also allows it. Wrigley Field here around where I live, they've built a DraftKings sports book, and other stadiums are in the process of doing that. So anyway, there's a lot of information to compile and people to talk with, but at some point I might be interested in sort of giving a sort of, overall look at what has the impact been of legal sports gambling on fans and how they watch games, on the business of sports, and on other aspects. So that I'd say that'd be the next big sports project.
Okay. I think you'll have a lot of very interested readers for that one.
Right. Right.
And as we're, kind of hashing through this conversation, I'm thinking, about where before we got to legalize gambling, there was fantasy sports.
Right.
And it
Yep.
was interesting to
Right.
see because I can remember some players, I think like Le'Veon Bell one time, he would go on Twitter and he would say like, "Oh, I apologize to all my fantasy owners. I had an off game." Or like, make sure you draft me first this year. And it was
Right.
like they did get involved in, well, it wasn't direct money for a lot of people. They were gambling with their fantasy pool, of course.
Right.
So it's kind of like there was like a little bit of writing on the wall and a little precursor to where we're at right now through
Right.
fantasy sports. But yeah,
That's
it's interesting because I think for fans, it's a no brainer. They've loved it. The revenue to these leagues has to be through the roof.
Mhm.
And I haven't seen anything to the negative yet where we caught, a major team literally throwing a game or a
right.
referee going all the way back to what we started with that is doing something as egregious as the 72 Olympics, where it's like, was that gambling motivated or was there some other sort of inspiration to do that?
Yeah. No, and that's
So,
interesting because in my research, I didn't find the 72 result was anything involved with gambling. I think it was more national pride
sure.
and the ability to make sure the U.S. could lose a game and the Soviets could win.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So this is really cool. I mean, I could keep going and going talking sports on this.
Yeah, definitely.
But anything else that you want to leave our listeners with as we wrap up here, Dave?
Well, let's see. I mean, for 3 seconds in Munich, I would just reiterate, it's a story of evil. You have the terrorism, 11 Israeli athletes and coaches killed by Palestinian terrorists. And this was on German soil. So it reminded many people of obviously Nazi Germany. And this was the first Olympics Germany had had since Berlin, and Hitler was in power. So they were trying to do everything they could to avoid the Nazi stigma. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. It was supposed to be the games of peace and joy, but it didn't happen. And then the corruption at the gold medal game and the heartbreak the players felt, the U.S. players, but they stood for principle after that. They rejected their silver medals to this day. And regarding Lamar Hunt, what a fantastic guy who changed the face of sports in football, soccer, tennis. He had such a huge impact. He was also a very gentle, humble guy who, never really wanted any credit. And he just quietly revolutionized sports. And so that's all I'd add. And Brian, thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, David. This was so insightful. I love history, and I think as people hear these things, especially about sports, which it seems like everybody has at least a little bit of a fascination with, it's
Right.
great to kind of get this history lesson. So,
Oh,
with that said, thanks for your time, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Caderna podcast. Again, I'm your host, Brian Caderna. We had the pleasure of speaking with David Sweet. Be sure to go out and check out his new book, 3 Seconds in Munich, and his older book, but also just as good, Lamar Hunt, the gentle giant who revolutionized professional sports. Until next time, have fun. This podcast is intended for the general public and for informational purposes only. The show does not provide any recommendations or investment advice regarding any specific account type, service, strategy, or product, or to otherwise act in any fiduciary or other capacity. Please contact a financial professional for guidance and information that is specific to your situation. Brian Caderna does not provide tax or legal advice. Please contact your accountant or legal advisor to discuss your situation. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Caderna Financial Team, and opinions stated are their own. All investments contain risk and may lose value. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. References to specific securities, asset classes, and financial markets are for illustrative purposes only and do not constitute a solicitation, offer, or recommendation to purchase or sell a security. Brian Caderna is a registered representative and financial advisor of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. OSJ 300 Broadacres Drive, Suite 175, Bloomfield, New Jersey, 07003. Phone number 973-244-4420.
Securities products and advisory services offered through PAS, member FINRA SIPC. Financial representative of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. PAS is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Caderna Financial Team is not an affiliate or subsidiary of PAS or Guardian. California Insurance License Number 0K04194.